Design is all about the future. There are infinite ways to interpret how that future could be, but it's up to us to design it. Thanks to advances in new technology and fresh perspectives, we are at the dawn of a new era of design. And from here, we're able to reflect back on what has been made and perhaps even overlooked in the past and reimagine the impact those same ideas could make today. And this is precisely what Hyundai have done with their new Envision 74. It's about time that something like this came to the market. They pulled off a magic trick. And that combination of working while looking good is unbeatable. My first impression as I walk up to this car from that all-important front view is one of a very, let's call it almost a 70s, early 70s impression, something that looks like it was born out of that age there. The very first thing that you notice are the eyes. It's going to give you the identity of the car, first of all. The other thing that I see immediately is the amount of slope that we have between the base of the windscreen and the front of the bonnet, the front of the hood. It's going to give you an enormous amount of front end view on the road ahead. So that's another important distinctive trait there. You've got this lower half here that is also quite geometric, let's call it a little bit angular. Another distinctive thing that I'm noticing right away is if you take these two lines, the bottom of the lip of the splitter and the road itself here, that distance there, the ramp angle, is quite low here. So they've obviously tuned the car to be a very well-handling car on the road. So obviously it's a sports car. The other thing that I see immediately when I look at the car from the top view is you have these very almost blistered out fenders and you see a very tight waistline. Now, that is one of the most ultimate sexy ways of designing a car because you can almost remember this is sort of like that hourglass figure, if you remember the pinup girls from the 40s and 50s, where they had the big bosoms and the very tight waist and then the larger hips. Now, when we talk about wedge shape, we mean that angle there pretty much. And it kind of resembles a doorstop or something like that perhaps, but they also have it in the back. And that is also, again, the wedge shape that we can recall from the past. So this car is definitely something with a very sporty attitude, very dynamic attitude. And then also we look at the back end here, that is a very wide back end. And then obviously the diffuser in the back, and that distance there to the ground is quite high, means it's going to be very good for actual downforce. But on it all, the first impression, we have a very dynamic car that we're looking at. It's about time that something like this came to the market. Retro looking at a car, again, that's, you could almost interpret it as being a revival of a car from the past, what we would call a retro, now futuristic, bringing the past into the future with modern technology. So you're capturing a lot of that emotion of the past and bringing that into the future using high-tech innovation, new features, things that really make the car cutting edge. For too long, we've had cars that have played it too safe. Safe, not so much in terms of obvious safety, but in terms of playing the design in a safe way that it becomes almost bland and generic. We've reached a point where a lot of the designs have lost control in their attempt to create something too dramatic. And this car here is not only just relying on things that we recognize, but it's taking those things that we're familiar with and putting them into a future context, which is very well done. Even though it has captured a bit of that times past feeling, it is very futuristic in today's society if we look at a car like this. Now here we have the Hyundai Pony. Now this car obviously influenced the design of the N74. You can see immediately the similarity in the profiles here, the front here having a very wedgy, very tapered front nose area. It almost becomes even more obvious when you see the taper that we have here off the back window. coming in like that. You can see the rear end graphic here and the very distinctive B-pillar here. But if we look at the original sketch, this definitely shows that there's an influence of the two concepts, a connection, a genetic link between the two. This type of sketching, obviously we don't do it today, it's an old school style, but it is done by a person who many car designers today consider one of the great masters, or even maybe the greatest master of car design, Giorgetto Giugiaro. Now you might not recognize the name, but those who know. So for whatever reason, this car never actually made it to production. So what did Giugiaro do? Did he sit around and cry? Did he mope? Did he pout? Did he say, I'm gonna hang up my pencils, I'm not good enough, I'm never gonna design another car again in my life? Heck no. What he did do was find a company that would appreciate the genius of his vision. That car being the DeLorean. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know if Back to the Future would have had the same impact if they'd been going back to the future riding a pony. Now, starting with the deep dive on the front end analysis of this car, the first thing I want to talk about, the amber LED parametric pixel running lamps that you see here in this area. And that is, for me, a master stroke of design, because although it looks simple, although it looks like anybody could do it, nobody has done it. And that is in itself the secret. I'm wondering if actually the full lights, when they put them on, is actually an increased illumination in this area here, as well as perhaps something that we can barely see in this area here. So perhaps there is a more intense, more pixelated version of the headlights when we see it on, which could be very impressive. Another element that's very cool is the way they've kept what I mentioned before, that angularity to the intakes here. It's not your typical organic, very soft type of intake. It's much more structural. Typically in the old days, they didn't have this element here. That allowed a lot of air to come underneath the car, lift the front end up, and give you a very scary, very nervous feeling driving the car. There's a very good tumble home here ratio, which means that that angle from there to there is fairly steep, which makes the car look very dynamic. Obviously, you don't want to do it too much because you're going to intrude on the pilot's head or the driver's head, but you want to keep it giving you a minimal, what we call cross-sectional area to the car, because less frontal area, better for drag. Now, what I'm getting from this view here is a feeling of presence, of mass. Obviously, from this distance here to here, you can see how wide, how broad the car looks. So what I want to do is look at the car from a different angle that I can appreciate it and analyze it from more of a top view, which is rare because we often don't see a car from the top view unless it's passing, underneath somewhere. But that view is going to help us to see the car more in its entirety. This starts to highlight the actual bulk, the actual mass of this vehicle here. So what you're looking at is almost a flared out section to the front fenders, as well as in the rear, through here. That does give the car a very, very wide stance on the road. The wider the car looks, or the wider the car is, the lower the car looks. And those are the dynamic proportions we try to get when we're doing a sports car, obviously. Now, what they've done to highlight that broadness of shoulders, that broadness of the body of the surfacing, is they've actually kept the waist very, very tight. So the contrast between very wide shoulders, very wide chest area, and hips is noted by the fact that the distance of the greenhouse from the belt line inwards is fairly narrow. And again, they've included what we called earlier the tumble home. So that makes the greenhouse tuck in a lot more. So you get a real contrast in volumes, and that gives the car the presence that it has. If you're not sure why you feel this car looks sporty, well, that's definitely one of the reasons behind it. Now the design looks a little bit like it's been designed by a ruler, and a ruler is something that we never use in design unless perhaps you work with Tesla or you've worked with them on the Cybertruck. If we were to design a car with a line like that, this tells you nothing. It's about as boring can be for a line. There's no tension in the line, there's no excitement, there's no acceleration. Now, a curved line will show you a lot more, will tell you a lot more, will give you a lot more energy, a lot more dynamic, a lot more excitement to a line. So you can see that that line starts to go up and starts to accelerate downwards. That is a line that is in tension. But again, you can start to see that they've avoided that curved philosophy. Now there is probably a slight bow to all these lines. I wouldn't say 100% that they're straight. That slight curvature gives it a slight bit of almost tension to it. So it's done well, obviously. But then again, you would see, for example, here is an inflection point. They go again here, fairly straight, not too straight. Another inflection point. And then as it goes down across the bonnet, the hood, you can see that it's almost got another inflection point there and goes off like that. So the car, you can start to see straight lines here, angles, straight line here, slight angle there. Everything is pretty much based off of a geometric type of design language. When you do a top view and you have a side view, those two elements there are, in this case here, almost like what we call two languages, basically. You have a very sensual top view and you have almost a very geometric side view. So on that point of the two language, it's also, again, if I want to relate it in another manner, it's probably like those playing cards where you see an image and you slightly angle it one way and see one view, you angle it the other way and you get a completely almost different view. It's almost like a trick on the eyes. It's playing a bit of magic. Typically, it's something very hard to pull off, but when it's done as well as they've done it here, that is magic. They've managed to do it so expertly that it's, for me, it's very impressive to be able to have two languages that actually understand each other, work well together, aren't even similar when you really analyze it, but they do combine them expertly and exquisitely. Again, you get something on the bottom of the car, which helps very well. You've got this sort of darkened area in this zone here. That helps enormously to reduce the visual volume of the height of the car. So from there to there is suddenly visually a lot less than if you had body color extending all the way to the bottom of the rocker or the sill panel. So that is in effect one way of reducing the volume of the car. Another feature that we look at that is very DeLorean-esque is the split line that we have coming through here, through here, and through here. That is obviously also part of the DeLorean's aesthetics on the side graphic. You'll notice that right away. What does kill this design for me? And again, the more I look at it, the more I don't think it even works on the car, is the rear spoiler here. Now, this design doesn't seem to need it for me. I think if they were going to do a spoiler, there'd be a lot of other solutions. In fact, why don't we just have a quick go at it? Let's trust my semi-Photoshop skills on this and see what it would look like if we actually eliminated it. So I think perhaps just by doing this, we'll get a feeling of a much cleaner design. Now, maybe this car isn't all about, let's call it clean design. It's more about simple design. But again, that is a bit of a complication, a bit of complexity added to the overall design of the car. Makes it perhaps a little bit less sporty, but not in the sense that that spoiler is what works with this car. I think a different spoiler would work a lot better for this car. Now you can imagine if this diffuser was actually in body color, how much heavier, well, you don't even have to imagine. Let me just quickly show you. If this part here was not in a darker color, not in black, for instance, and it was in body color, just continuing down through, how much heavier all that bottom of the bumper is going to make the rear end of the car look. Kind of like carrying, a load of potatoes back there, a big sack of potatoes. So you can see that by making it black, how much more improved, how much more lightweight that whole area of the bumper looks. Now you can see by erasing the black that I put on there and bringing that spoiler back in, how much more weight it adds to the back end of the car. Not a good move. So I would just eliminate the spoiler, work with active aerodynamics, bring in what we call modern tech, modern aero tech, and work on something like that. Again, that is probably the biggest spoiler on the car overall for me. Before we get 100% to the rear, let's look at that ducting area through here. You can see what I meant before. Needing that to get a lot of the hot air that's coming in, especially cooling the brakes and things, getting that out of the fender area back along here. You can see another exit through there. A lot of aero going on. Now here's an interesting thing that I love in car design, is what we call the 30-50 coverage angle. Basically, there's a forward angle from the center of the wheel, and there's a rearward angle from the center of the wheel. That's what we call the 30-50 angle. When you arrive at the point here that you need to keep in order to cover the entire tire, then you're allowed to go in. And most car companies don't go in, they continue downwards, and then they go like that. There's a lot of mass here on today's cars. It doesn't need to be there. I think the visuals of being able to pull in the car, especially on a sports car, being able to pull in the bumper as soon as you get past that coverage angle, and then exposing a lot of the tire through here, that's what gives you the feeling that the car has a lot of squat, a lot of width to it, a lot of excellent stance. So what's beautiful about the back end of the car for me is immediately the rear end graphic, especially the rear light signature that it has on the back, which means that it is done by the same designer who did the headlights in the front. That is becoming, for me, Hyundai's personal autograph signature, and it identifies them immediately. If I was driving behind this car at night, 100 yards away, I would know what kind of car it is or who makes this car. Great move. Now, interestingly, what the N74 has is this straight surface coming off the deck, and then a slight chamfer through there, then another horizontal line running through there, then another chamfer coming down there, another horizontal line running through there, another horizontal line running through there, another horizontal line running through there, and then obviously you get down to the diffuser area, which then becomes a bit different. But there are a lot of lines going on through here. Not that it's bad, it's a bit geometric, it's a bit origami-ish, but it is interesting. And I think the one definite point that it does do is it infatuates or exaggerates the width of the car. Now, this distance from here to here is what I said earlier is incredibly wide on this car. I would say it's in the territory of a Ferrari Testarossa. Anybody who's seen a Ferrari Testarossa from behind, I mean, the first thing you notice is the width of that car. It's roughly 2 meters, I think, wide. This probably is in the ballpark. So the next thing that really grabs me positively, I'm not sure because I've never seen it yet in public on a road car like this, but is the dramatic exaggeration of the diffuser. Impressive because it's very unusual to have a road car with the amount of diffuser working as it is here. Those are a lot of strakes you have there, with most impressively the height difference, as I mentioned, from there to the ground level. You can imagine all that is a working area for the air diffuser underneath the car working through. Now, as you can see, again, as you come down the greenhouse, hit the waistline, the belt line, again, it's that wide shoulder, wide stance that we were talking about, where it comes out quite a bit there and then down. So this width here is something very unusual to see that dramatic on a road car. That's what we remember. If you look at perhaps even a car that relates very closely to this one would be the Audi Quattro concept from 2010. Very well planted on the road in terms of proportions and stance, good shoulders on that car. So again, you'll see that through here, very closely related to that. And again, it works. It makes this car have a lot of presence on the road, a lot of visual excitement, a lot of visual entertainment, a car that becomes very desirable because it looks good. It definitely, I'm sure, works very well, and that combination of working well and looking good is unbeatable. Now, before I wrap up, there's one thing I want to do that I haven't done before that I've always wanted to do, is to have a look at the designer's development sketches, but what I want to see is the thinking behind the idea of the design. This type of work is getting more polished, obviously, but this type of sketching here is what we as design heads are looking for, because the most impressive thing on a drawing for me like this is the designer's use of section lines. When he starts putting in what we saw earlier, what the surface is doing. Now, you can do that with renderings, you can do that with highlights, with contrast and things like that in Photoshop. But the thinking designer will always put on his sketch, as he's thinking, these section lines that will tell you what the surface is doing. He's thinking as he's putting these design lines on. This is not to impress anybody. He probably never thought these sketches would ever be shown to anybody. They're probably rough sketches that he was doing as ideation when he was first coming up with the idea. But again, something like that really starts to show you the direction of the theme, what he's trying to get at. Now, the one sketch that is the most important sketch for me, and all the ones you see here on the screen, is also definitely the smallest. You probably haven't even seen it, but again, it has for me, the most value. And it's this one right here. And the reason why I put so much value on this is because if you're able to draw 3 good lines and give an identity to the car, a unique identity to the car, then you've got a great design. When you need more than 3 lines, you start getting into dangerous territory where the car is starting to rely on a lot of lines to give it its uniqueness, and it will date very quickly. So again, something like that where you can see almost a minimal amount of lines and still show the character, the theme, the strong uniqueness of the car, then you know from the beginning you're on to a winner. And I definitely think that this car, from that sketch to this one, to the final images that we've just seen, is definitely showing that this car is a winner. Now, to conclude my analysis of the Envision 74, there are 3 main points that I consider vital in terms of determining the quality of the design of the vehicle. Now, those 3 points: number 1, proportions. Does the car have good proportions? Now, proportions is very interesting because it's not taste. This is a science. Design is a science. It's not art, where art is subjective. Design being a science, you either have right or wrong. So is the car well proportioned? Yes. Is the car desirable? I don't know about you, but I would have one of these now if I could. And lastly, point number 3, identity. Can it stand on its own in the market? Does it have a unique identity? The answer for me is a most definitive yes. They pulled off a magic trick where this car from 2 different angles seems to have 2 different languages, yet at no point does it seem disconnected or fractured. Now it comes to that point in the episode where I have to give this design a rating. Difficult one, of course, because this car combines, like I said, a bit of the old school of thought, but brilliantly combines it also with the new school of thought. So again, that brilliant combination, I think, is what merits a high rating in design, because they've been able to do it very well. Again, it comes down to love at first sight. Do you have that feeling of attraction, of desirability, emotional design, something that stirs the loins, stirs the soul? For me, this car does. I'm going to give this car a pretty high rating of 9.5. As always, let me know in the comments below what you think. Do you think this is a retro rehash, or is this a forward-facing future of design? And be sure to hit the subscribe button if you have any questions about where I am, because we might be showing that to you in some of our upcoming videos. Again, as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.